Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for episode 143 of the Freight 360 podcast. We got a great episode and show today. I always love having guests on. Ben, how you doing today before we introduce introduce and reintroduce our guests today?
Doing well. Had a pretty good discussion back in the green room. We probably should have got that recorded, but looking forward to the episode.
That's why I was like,
good time.
We have to hit record before we lose any of this. So, Trey Griggs back with us again. Trey, welcome back. It's always good to have you. How you doing today?
Always good to be with you guys, man. Looking forward to some sports chat in a minute, but always good to be with you guys.
We'll actually get to kind of co-op on a discussion today with some sports. And then we've also got Dan McCann here with us today. Dan, welcome to the show. We'll give you a chance to introduce yourself here in just a little bit.
Sounds
but
good.
First, if you are brand new to Freight 360, we're glad you found us. If you've been with us for a while, make sure to keep listening, sending me your questions. We've got 3 more questions we're going to answer at the end of today's episode. And keep sharing us with your friends. We're up to over, I think our Facebook community is over 41,000 now, and we're getting crazy downloads and good feedback. So, and obviously you get the trolls and the haters out there, but that just means you're getting more relevant. So Trey knows that. So, just kidding. All right, before we get into the episode and the topic, we're going to talk a lot with, the labor situation and staffing in general today, but we got to talk some sports here. So
we have to. Come on.
First off, we're going back to last Wednesday, the match, right? The Capital One's the match. It was.
Is this episode 6? What version is this? 5?
I think
6?
I think it was 6, wasn't it?
There was Tiger and Phil was the first one. The second one was Phil and someone else, wasn't it? And then they went into the other athletes.
Then they went to Capital One stuff. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's not important.
So anyway,
it's like
we had
6, something like that.
Trey, like normally I feel like as a Bills and Chiefs fan, like we're usually on opposite sides of the
typically we are.
Event.
That's true.
That's right. It was really cool to see Allen and Mahomes play together. How bad of a golfer is Josh Allen? Or I guess how average of a like I feel like I could golf with Josh Allen. I could.
Considering he's a quarterback, like this is the thing. You got to think about you got to put it in context. He's a quarterback. Quarterbacks generally are athletes and they're good golfers. So you expect them to be better than that. Rodgers is pretty good. There's been a lot of quarterbacks through the years that have been pretty good golfers. Let's give him a little bit of time, but I was not impressed.
No. Mahomes looked pretty good, though. I would say so obviously, if you didn't watch it, it came down to the 18th green. Or, I'm sorry, they only had 12 holes. So it was the 12th.
Came down to the last hole. Yeah.
And it was literally, Rodgers he sank a nasty, 60-foot putt. Something like no one should make it.
I think it was 60, but it was long. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, I mean, Mahomes kept them in it. And, Brady, he's not so good either, but he doesn't need to be.
Rodgers is legit. Rodgers plays in the celebrity tournament every year. He's legit. He's a pretty good golfer. So, no, it was fun. It's nice to see those guys. I'll tell you what I enjoyed more than the match. I actually enjoyed the pre-match conversation that they had with all 4 quarterbacks that they aired. I caught a lot of that, and that was actually pretty fascinating because those guys, Brady and Rodgers have gone after it, each other for many years. Now you got Mahomes and Brady have history. You got now Mahomes and Allen that have history. So they talked a lot about playoffs. They talked a lot about mentality and respect they have for each other. I actually enjoyed that more than the actual golf.
I think the back and forth was pretty funny.
They aired it right at the end, I think, afterward, right? But it was recorded before.
Correct. Yeah.
They all sat there and talked about what was their, what motivated them or whatever to get into football and all that stuff. So,
and Allen talked about how Mahomes came up to him after the game, the playoff game, and congratulated him. In that moment of celebrating, Mahomes took the time to go over and congratulate Allen. And then Mahomes said, "Well, the reason I did that was because Brady did that to me when they beat us." And so it's neat to see these guys who really respect each other and are learning from each other and really just kind of carrying the game. I mean, the game's in a really good spot with those guys and the many other great quarterbacks that the league has and the players in general. The game's in a pretty good spot, but those guys were fun to listen to.
Definitely. So I got to ask Dan. Dan, you're in Atlanta, the Atlanta area, right? Who's your?
Yep.
I assume you're a Falcons fan.
Yeah, Falcons fan, Braves fan, and UGA fan.
Okay. All right.
So dogs.
Well, I mean, you
got a
got
couple championships.
right?
I'm a transplant from New York, though, so I still have a little affinity up in that area.
What part of New York?
Right out, like the city, New York City. So,
Okay.
Yankees, Giants.
So I live in
Yankees,
Buffalo, which
yeah.
is why I had to ask which part of New York. People usually think Buffalo
South.
is in
I'm
Canada.
in the south side. I'm a Southie.
Okay. I was just out there a couple weeks ago, and yeah, it's funny. I was driving through Long Island. Well, I was in New York City and Long Island, and you cross a certain part of it's either Queens or something, where all of a sudden everyone switches from for all the sports, right? Baseball, hockey, and then I don't know how football splits up there, but it's you're literally neighbors, and you're rooting for opposite teams. So crazy.
Yeah. That's the curse of having so many teams up in that market.
Yeah. Yep. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but did you guys see the one guy that got drafted for the Jets, and he had no idea that the Jets played in New Jersey? He thought he was playing in New York City. And I was like, oh, gosh.
So, Nate, when you asked me what part of New York, I was about to say North Jersey, right? So I always tell people I'm from New York now that I live in Atlanta. But it's what part of New York? Well, New Jersey. They're like, that's a different state, right? I'm like, yeah. Yep, my mom told me that.
That's funny.
Let's talk golf a little bit further here before we get in. I feel like we're having a good sports chat here. What do you think about is it the Saudi Arabian League? Is that the Live Golf?
LIV Golf. Yeah.
LIV
Golf. Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's there's two sides to it. There's this side that says, hey, let's let there be competition between leagues, which would actually be healthy, which would make the leagues better. But this is not necessarily fair market competition because they just have an unlimited amount of funds. So it's got a slightly different dynamic than I think fair market competition. But what's interesting is that if you take away LIV Golf for a moment and you just evaluate the salaries or the earnings that professional golfers make compared to other sports, it's laughable. The top golfer might make $9 million a year in earnings if they play well. There's no guarantee. They got to play well.
Right.
And the most they can make is about $9 million a year. You look at the top football player, $45 million a year. The top basketball player, $55, $60 million a year. In other major sports, they're making significantly more money at the top. And in other sports too, your expenses are paid. So if you play on a baseball team, for example, and you make $30 million in a year, you're also not paying for hotels, you're not paying for travel, you're not paying for food. But in professional golf, you're paying for everything. So if you're a brand new player on the PGA Tour, if you're one of the top 150, 200 players in the world on the PGA Tour, you have no guarantee of income. You have no help with travel expenses and all the things that go into it. They have to pay for everything minus what they get from sponsors, whether it be clubs, balls, shoes, and they get some things and they get endorsement deals for sure. But it's the only sport, maybe tennis as well, where you're not guaranteed anything and you have to pay all your own expenses. And these guys are the best in the world at what they do and bring a lot of money to the PGA Tour through TV deals and things like that.
That's the other thing, Trey. That was what Phil was really pitching a bitch about, when this first came out. And he was like, look, he's like, some of the videos of my shots, we'll say it at the Masters, right? He's like, say, I hole one out from 70 yards. That video might make millions of dollars to the PGA. He's like,
and
I get none of it.
Over. And they'll use it over
none of
and
it.
over.
He's
That's
like,
right.
He's like, that's my work product. I've practiced for decades to be able to do that, and then they get to sell it, and I don't even get a revenue share on it. And he's like,
if he does use it, they will come after him and tell him to take it down. Right.
Exactly.
So,
and he's like, that's not fair. I mean, both sides of it.
There's a lot to it, but I think when you just look at this sport versus other sports, the players definitely feel like, hey, we're the product here. Take us away, and PGA Tour, you have nothing. And yet there's no minimum. My thought is this: if you make the PGA Tour, if you get a PGA Tour card, the tour should probably give you some money, for doing that, for being a part of the tour, to help pay for expenses, to make it a little bit easier, to perform at your highest level and all those kind of things, and just change the way that they structure things. But right now, it's a brutal sport. It's very hard. People grind. They go into massive debt. There's no guarantee that they're going to make it. It's tough.
There used to be two leagues back in the 60s. I can't remember what the other one was, but there were two leagues before pretty much Palmer and Nicklaus made PGA the predominant, I guess,
Would you
event or
consider
league.
Corn Ferry? Is Corn Ferry another league or just a minor league for the PGA?
Corn Ferry is a minor league, and that's the other thing too, is that the PGA Tour has made it so hard for college kids to come out and get on tour. Like other sports, you get drafted and you can play right away. But on the PGA Tour, you have to go through kind of the minor league system. That's the only way really to get on tour. And this is where it's going to be interesting because LIV Golf has money. So they could go to the college, the top 10, top 15 amateur golfers in the world, and they can offer them money right away, life-changing money to come over and play. And if they get those guys, which imagine if you're 22 and you have the chance to go play fewer events than the PGA Tour and make guaranteed big-time money and play well, that's life-changing money. It's going to be hard to say no.
Where are they getting where's the money coming from, though?
Saudi.
So the money's coming from Saudi Arabia. They've got basically a fund that they've created for public. I think it's called the Public Investment Fund. So they're taking their money and they're using it. But here's the thing: they're saying, "Hey, you can't take Saudi money; it's blood money." They're in the major professional soccer league over in Europe. They're in that league. They own a team over there. They have other events. LPGA plays in Saudi Arabia. The European Tour plays in Saudi Arabia. They're in other sports as well. And when you think about that in light of what's going on in China and the NBA's footprint in China, nobody's telling NBA that they shouldn't be a part of what's happening in China, even though China has a bad record of human rights violations as well. Like, to me, the argument falls flat. Like, yeah, should we be conscious about where money comes from? I think ideally you'd say yes, but that's not how the real world works. That's not how it happens. And so if the Saudis are funding the LPGA to come to the LPGA and have an event there, if they're funding the European Tour to come have an event there, if they're a part of the soccer league over in Europe as well, this is just the PGA Tour's only argument to say you shouldn't do this because it's morally wrong, when clearly from a moral standpoint, it seems to be that they're taking quite a bit of an advantage of the players that make their product.
It's a monopoly as of right now. They'll do anything they can to protect it.
Totally is a monopoly, So, and for them to say that people can't play on their tour, I mean, I guess that's their opinion, but if enough, it's power in numbers, right? If enough top players go, the PGA will be forced to change what they're doing. And I hope that they are, because I think competition actually makes everything better.
Who are the big names? I think I saw Bryson was one of the latest ones to commit.
I don't know about Phil, DJ, Ricky's going over there for a little bit. There's some other players in the European Tour, Lee Westwood, Ian Poulter, some of those guys. One of the big surprises was a guy who was an up-and-coming PGA Tour. He just won, Taylor Gooch. He won the PGA Tour. He's in his 24, 25, so he's a younger player, and he made the jump. So it's going to be real interesting to see if they get the amateurs to come over. Who else might defect? Kevin Na went over there as well. So there's several. But it's pretty fascinating to see what's going to happen with that. So
interesting. Lastly, on golf, the Memorial Tournament, was it last weekend? Right?
Yep,
last weekend.
Billy Horschel.
Yep.
Billy Ho.
Yeah, he had his last round wasn't phenomenal, but he had such a strong. I think what did he shoot, like even, maybe 1 under on the last round?
When you're 5 up, you basically tell everybody to come get you. I mean, that's kind of how that works.
That was pretty close in the PGA, though. It wasn't. My mind just went blank. He was 5 or 6 up starting Sunday for the PGA, and he ended up losing 17th and 18th. My mind just went blank.
No, PGA was Mito Pereira. He was up 3 shots. But 3 shots is different than 5. I mean, I know it's only 2 shots, but yeah, he was only up 3 starts Sunday. He was 9 under, and second place was 6 under. But still, at the same time, like when you're playing well, and the golf course is not necessarily yielding a ton of birdies, if you shoot par, then you force people at minimum to shoot 5 under, and that's tough to do. So, I think when you're in the lead like that, you try not to play conservative, but you also aren't taking many risks because you don't have to. So you're hitting middle of the fairway, maybe hitting an iron or 3-wood off the tee. You're hitting middle of the green. You're 2-putting for par. Maybe it'll drop for birdie. Just don't make mistakes. I think that's. That was the key to that, and it's hard to pick up 5 or 6 strokes on Sunday.
I think on 15, and that was pretty much at that point. He's like, "All right, I got 3 holes left.
It's over."
Super conservative, and
those guys are good enough. He could have won with a putter at that point.
Take your putter out.
A 7-iron.
I think Thomas came from 6 back at the PGA.
Parred the back with a 7-iron.
Yeah. I mean, Justin Thomas definitely came back.
Thomas was 6 back, wasn't he? 7
He was
back?
Actually 8 back with 10 holes to go. But the difference is Mito Pereira didn't play even par. Mito Pereira plays even par. He wins the championship easily. So that's the whole point. Is like if somebody comes back to you, you got a shot. But you know, as well as Justin Thomas played, if Mito Pereira doesn't make mistakes, you know, he doesn't. Justin Thomas doesn't win. So that's the issue. You got to shoot a crazy good round on a Sunday to come back from 5 strokes, and second place was 5 strokes. So you got to think about it. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th place were probably 6, 7 strokes back. So that's an even bigger lift. So you know, it was a good calculation on Billy Ho's part. Cool to see his kids run out on the green as well when he won. That's probably my favorite moment in golf is when the kids run out on the green. They don't care about anything. You know, they're just running out to see dad. I love that innocence. It's so much fun to see.
Oh, yeah. Yep, absolutely. Well, good stuff. We got a good episode today. Good topic. Ben, let's give a shout out to our friends over at DAT Freight and Analytics before we hop into the main content here.
Taking the guesswork out of freight with DAT. The DAT Loadboard Network is the largest on-demand freight marketplace in North America, connecting freight brokers with available capacity on any lane. Grow your business with tools that allow you to find new business partners, and you can quickly qualify and onboard new carriers. With industry's leading freight rate data, you can make clear and confident pricing decisions. Check out the show notes for a free month of DAT Power, Express, or Trucker's Edge.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to talk the labor market today in general, and obviously our episodes are very all over the place sometimes, but I wanted to introduce Dan McCann here and give you just a quick second to tell us about, you know, what you do. I know if you guys aren't watching on YouTube, apparently it's hat day because we're all wearing hats, but Dan's got the SimTrain hat on. Dan, tell us a little bit about you and SimTrain and kind of how you and Trey cross paths.
Sure. Trey and I added our hats after we logged in and saw the two of you guys, Nate and Ben. So we said, we better put our hats on too. So happen to have one in the office. So yeah, I crossed paths with Trey when he was at Lean and leading sales. We built a product that helps employees practice their job in a simulated environment, both conversations as well as software. And we were doing some work with Lean. Trey leaned in big time on sim training and, you know, bringing on new employees. You talk about, you know, labor. They grew from 1,200 to 7,000 people last year alone. And you know, utilizing simulation-based training where people can practice on their own, get instant feedback on their performance, build confidence while they're developing skills is a big part of, you know, that type of growth. And it's also a big number to maintain too, Nate. So has both sides, training as well as coaching and retention of employees.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's good to have you on here. Ben, looks like you're about to hop in and say something. What do you got?
I'm anxious to kind of dig in. I got a chance to go through their website, obviously, in preparation of this. It's a really cool company, and I think it solves like a really valid problem for training people, right? You know, especially in our industry, there's a pretty big cost to mistakes. Even minuscule mistakes, right? Like a BOL number wrong, a PO's wrong, right? Like a zip code, a city's wrong, like you're sending a truck maybe to the wrong side of the country, right? We've all seen this stuff happen. So, I mean, I think there's a real reluctance in our industry for on-the-job training for some very valid reasons. And I think this product is a great solution to a problem, and it really allows some people to get some real-life experience. So really anxious to kind of dig in and hear a little bit more about it.
Well, and one of the things, too, that I think about, and this is brokerage-specific, but it probably relates to other industries, but let's say a broker, a smaller brokerage, right, hires a new rep, and that person gets assigned to an account after 6 months or whatever. If they're not properly trained and they don't know how to handle certain situations, because of a mistake they make, it could cost a large customer, right? You could lose a massive customer, and then your business could potentially lose a big chunk of its sales or revenue because of one mistake that person was not properly either trained on or didn't have somebody there to assist them through that. So that's kind of what popped out to me. So it's a really cool product, I think, that you guys have. I want to hop over to Trey now. Trey, get us caught up. I know we just went through basically golf 201 right there, but
nice.
What's the latest and greatest with you? It's been far too long since we've had you on the show.
Well, good to be back as always. Couple of things. First of all, Dan, that hat is fire. Love that. I need to get one of those SimTrain hats.
Done.
Those are nice. Shout out to my boy Ryan Rogers at Silver Fox. Text locate as well for the hat that I'm getting to wear today. So no, it's great to be back on the show. And, you know, the number one reason that new employees fail is for poor onboarding and poor training. When they're not brought into a company well with a good process, a solid process, and they don't get trained in their job well, it is just a recipe for disaster. So not only is there that risk of revenue loss or customer loss, but there's also the risk and the cost of employee loss, employee retention. If you spend all that time bringing an employee in and then you don't train them well and don't onboard them well, they don't experience success, then after 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 months, they're gone. You're starting that process all over again. And the cost to replace a full-time employee entry level is around 25 to 30% of their salary. So if you're paying somebody, $50,000, $60,000, you're looking at, $15,000, $20,000 to replace them. And if it's just a cycle that just continues. So having proper training and onboarding is so critical. And that's one thing I love about what Dan's doing at SimTrain. I'm so excited to have him on the show today and talk about that.
So
as far as
that, I just just reminded me of something. This takes me back to my I took a course in college, and it was like, I don't know if it was OB, is that an occupational behavior? Something with like, it was almost like an HR type course, and it talked about the cost of training and retention, and it was something like, and this is probably like 15 years ago, but it was like $25,000 to $30,000 was the average realized cost to a company if they hire, train, and then don't retain an employee through like a 6-month period or something like that. It's insane. And that's assuming that they don't make a mistake that costs you financially in addition to whatever their salary and all that was. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a big thing there.
On that same point, I remember when I worked at one of the larger box companies, I was astounded at how that was the largest line item expense in the entire company, was exactly what we're talking about, training and employee turnover. And they were like, this is by far the largest cost to growth, is bringing people in that don't make it, that we train and invest, an inordinate amount of money in, that you just get no return on, right? And I think a lot of companies try to somehow get the growth and avoid that risk, and it's really not possible because it's a human risk, right? The only really way you mitigate it is through training, education, and giving them real life experience so that they can actually learn the job quicker, right? I mean, just sending somebody out there and going, hey, let's see how you do, right, is absolutely a recipe for failure.
Yeah, and people need to see wins early on. They need to see success early on in their role.
That's a big point, Trey. People want to be successful, right? And if they're struggling and they're looking at people next to them who are doing well at their job and they're asking them, like, what do I need to do? Why am I not doing well? All of a sudden they feel like they don't belong, and it's harder to fit in to the culture and become part of the organization because they're struggling longer than maybe the company doesn't think they're struggling longer than they should be, but they do. And their mindset starts to wander, and then they start to wander off, and then attrition becomes the only alternative for them.
And I think that happens also to a lot of people way more frequently than you'd think. I mean, Nate, we ran into this with our class that we taught Tuesday. A few people that have been, in brokerage now for a year hitting a lull where they just, to that same point, like, don't necessarily, I don't want to say it's not motivation, but it's demoralization, and it's related to like expectations. They expect to get farther faster, and when they don't, they get demoralized and frustrated. And the only way you help with that is through training, right? Coaching, practice.
I'll tell you one thing that I've run into quite a bit over the years with, the agent side of freight brokering is I'll come across folks that it's their first time being a 1099 independent contractor as an agent for a brokerage, and they previously worked as a W-2 employee for a small company, and they're trained and experienced in freight, but they were trained bad habits, and that to me is almost worse than not being trained. Like I come across people that they thought, let's say you get a truck order not used from a customer or detention, right? The customer's going to pay you something in addition to what they were going to. And then they take that and they either pay less to the carrier or they don't pay the carrier at all. And they're basically just taking money and it's becoming a profit center for them. And I'm like, that's a terrible business practice to, like, if your customer is going to pay a truck order not used for $200 because they ended up canceling the truck that you got them, that should go to the truck. You don't get to keep that. That's just part of you doing it. But, there's companies that they instill and train bad habits and business practices into their employees, and then they wonder why their culture of their business or their reputation is, subpar. So I think there's something to be said about that as well.
It's kind of funny, Nate, that one of the reasons we built SimTrain is we would train people, and it was all knowledge based, right? And that was a big problem. And they needed to learn how to apply that knowledge and perform. And they'd go out on the floor, and oftentimes they weren't asking our best people. They were asking like the bottom 20%, what do I do? And they were picking up really bad habits, or they couldn't interpret it, right? And it was so funny because I actually, before we built SimTrain, we integrated into training how to go read the scorecard on the floor so you knew which people to go ask and which ones not to go ask, how to do your job better, right? So, and then I figured that's not working. Let's go ahead and build something that can everyone can learn how to do their job the right way and do it better.
Yeah,
so
I'm curious. Let me jump in real quick. So speaking to our friends over at DAT, I started working there in 2012, and I had a month-long training program. Shout out to Janice Copton in the inside sales department. I did not spend time with any sales reps or get near the floor for 2 weeks minimum. I went through a very rigorous training process. And what that did was it allowed me, once I did hit the floor, once I did meet with reps and start just watching what they're doing, I had such a good baseline foundation for the process and for all that I was able to ramp up really quickly once I got started. But think about that. DAT basically paid me for a month to do nothing, like from a value standpoint or return, because they saw the value of proper training. And most of their reps did really well when they got started because they put the time in to train correctly. And a lot of companies just don't do that. So shout out to our friends over DAT and my friend and my first sales boss, Janice Compton.
That's a really good point. So when I started in trucking, I worked for Conway Freight, which is now XPO, but the first 4 months that I worked for them, they sent me on the road to different service centers to shadow and learn different parts of the business. So everything from riding in the truck for a week with one of the local pickup and delivery guys in a certain city, riding around with a sales guy for a week, working on the dock, doing overnight, cross-docking, doing morning dispatch, doing daytime dispatch, literally everything, doing office administration. And they had to pay to send me across the entire Northeast region and, hotel, food, everything. And like you said, Trey, no value return. Like, they're not making any more money from me at this point. I'm literally just an expense to them. But 4 months, so a third of a year before I'm even, then they see where am I strong, where can I best be utilized in their organization. Then they placed me in a specific service center that had a specific need that I would be good at working on. And it goes to show that companies like that will invest time into their folks, I believe that I gave them a better return on their investment than other companies where they plug and play and they hope you work out. So
I think
there's a lot to be said about that. And business owners have this expectation of, I'm going to add a sales rep and boom, they're going to make me money right away. That's not necessarily the case.
I think that's really good takeaway, right? For all of our listeners out there, right? Like, the reason the larger companies do this isn't just because, like, randomly one day they said, like, let's try to spend more money before we put them to work, right? Like, it's because over the periods of decades, they realized that when they did a little bit more of it in test pilots, those people performed on average better than the rest. So then they rolled it out to more and over and over and over and over, improved, right? And you see this, like you just pointed out, Nate, so often with some of the smaller companies, and not even just in our industry, in other industries, right, that just have this expectation that this guy has sales experience. And even it's in a different industry. Well, I'm sure that'll transfer over. Within a week or two, he'll be printing money for us. And the reality is even when you know how to do this job and you move to another company, there's a learning curve and you still need to have this time before you get up to speed. And I think, like, the more in line our expectations are with reality, the way more likely we are to succeed. And also what Dan pointed out, the way less likely we are to frustrate the people we're bringing on, right? We're bringing them on because all those things, like, same with me. Like, I didn't always have a great experience with some of my first sales jobs, but I fondly remember the training and the culture and the environment when you see that people care about your well-being. They care about your development, and it genuinely makes you want to work harder with them and for them on this goal, right? Like, that's how you build a culture. It's not just, hey, we'll see if this develops over time by throwing people at phones and seeing who succeeds and who fails, right? It's genuinely caring enough that you're going to put that forward first.
Yeah, success is the product of proper expectations. It's critical to remember that. So let's talk about SimTrain. I'd love to talk about this. I'm excited about what Dan's doing at SimTrain with the team, because not only is training important, but especially if you're scaling, if you're adding a lot of people, it is hard to train each person really, really well with one or two trainers, because there's just not enough time. There's not enough bandwidth. There's just not enough time to do that. And you run into a lot of human error in training, bad practices. But if you can standardize it into a structure like what SimTrain has, it allows you to scale and continue with a high level of quality training. And that's really critical. So let's talk about SimTrain.
Yes. So, Trey, I mentioned, my new hires coming in and learning from the best folks on my floor and also tapping the shoulder of my worst folks. I will tell you, even the coaches that we were preparing and getting ready to provide them feedback and give them reinforcement on performance, that the need for a consistent message to a new hire, whether I'm talking to Trey today and I go to Ben tomorrow, you guys are both great at your jobs, but I'm going to interpret what you're telling me a little bit different, and I'm going to try to find my path to least resistance potentially, and then all of a sudden I get lost, right? And so, having a technology that provides that instant feedback that's consistent across the entire enterprise, whether it's 5 or 5,000 people, makes a big impact on how fast I learn and how quickly I'm going to be able to apply that knowledge. And that's just on the feedback side. Having the repetition and being able to go through those scenarios that Nate was talking about before, whether it's 4 months across different locations or it's 4 hours across multiple simulations, having that repetition, being able to go through it, I need to build my confidence and my skills. And it's one of the reasons we put the product together in the first place, so folks could get that value and love it. I mean, doing it in the transportation space has been a big inspiration for us. We love working with these companies, and the amount of time, effort, and energy they put into getting people successfully onboarded and wanting to be successful. It's our number one channel for this entire year.
So let me ask you this too. So whenever there's a product or a service that is new to somebody, I always like to ask the question, like, where does the information or the data or where does the information that you guys have that you're putting into the training, where does it come from, right? How do we know it's good? It's gonna lead you towards success, and it's not bad data or bad habits that we're training folks on. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I'll start. I'll let Trey follow up because he actually did some of that work. What's really cool is that training comes from our customers. Everything's 100% customizable. You can build all your own content. It could be based on training you're already doing. You might be doing role plays or round robins, or you might be doing, shadowing exercises like you were talking about, and you're just converting that into SimTrain, which it's all yours already. Or you might not have that, right? So we got the folks at Lean who are building out a complete library, carrier sales, customer sales, track and trace, operations, different roles and functional tasks within, a brokerage that they need. They're building out that library so it's all sitting there. You could run it as is, or you can customize it instead of having to start from scratch and building all new content, which is a big win for companies in the space, having that complete library to lean into.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is it everybody's kind of open source? So like technically if I got in there, I could go through Lean's catalog of training as of right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so when you say everyone open source, Ben, when you create your content and your custom content, then that you lock that down. Mm-hmm. What we set up in our partnership with Lean is theirs is open. Right. And so I don't get access to your actual content that you're running for a specific client that's customized, and I get to see all that. That gets walled off. But then there is an open library that they created that folks can go in and pull from. Maybe in the future we create an open marketplace where you can contribute, everyone, and you can get paid for contributing into the content library as well.
Well, what I was saying, and this is definitely something we could talk more about off air too, and tend to, is like, I think this is a great addition to what we do at Freight 360 as well. Again, we were talking about this in the green room, like, we'll run sessions, we'll run trainings, like you could see it sticks. And what did you refer to it as? What, the doorway?
The doorway effect. I only retain 10%, so I forget 90% of what we talked about when I leave the door, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's true. And we know that, right? And it's funny because that's where, I mean, our whole industry, coaching and training, moved away from like the seminar business, probably 5-7 years ago for that same reason, because people go, they get fired up. This is great. 2-3 days later, we go back to what we were doing, right? Like
Right.
it's the consistency in what you're doing that changes habits, changes behavior, and really leads you to the goals and the things that everybody wants, right? You know, the growth in the company, the growth in your book of business. And I think this would be a fantastic addition for, you know, our training, our coaching, and even the, you know, the clients that go through our course that want some self-paced training before they're ready to, you know, jump into it. How would that actually be facilitated? Like, how does this work? So if let's say I own my own brokerage, I've got 50 people. What does this look like from my point of view?
Yeah, first
I'll
off,
take this
Ben, I
one, Dan.
totally agree
Oh,
with
go ahead.
your sentiment. Sure, take it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, just to piggyback on what Dan said and answer your question, Ben, the great thing about this is that each company brings their own expertise and their own process. If you give this to 10 different freight brokers, yes, there is some crossover, some best practices that happen, but there might be some variances in each brokerage, whether it be the technology they use, a different TMS, or a different, you know, overall process that they might use. So it comes from the company providing the training in conjunction with working with the team at SimTrain to help, you know, build those, to get the training on how to build these out. And it's super easy to use, very intuitive from a user perspective to create sims and to edit and modify sims moving forward. But basically what happens is, you know, when you sign up for SimTrain, they take you through an in-depth training, which is awesome. I mean, they drink their own Kool-Aid. They do a great training to make sure that you know how to build sims, available for any questions you might have. As the sims become more complex, there's branch capabilities. So based upon the answer that, you know, that they get, a rep would need to answer a certain way. So you can have different variations in terms of, like, a sales call. It's not always cookie cutter in terms of what the prospect says on the call. A lot of times the responses vary. So you can create branches. So they can get really complex, and SimTrain is always there to help out. But SimTrain always works with their customers to build custom sims for them. You could start with a template, like we said, with some of the content that's already in there, and then customize it, or you can start from scratch if it's a totally new process or something different. But it's all about working with SimTrain, with their trainers, to build the content, to manage that content moving forward, and to really build out their own training library. And Dan, you can jump in on that, but it's been a great process working with them.
Yeah, and then Ben, what's cool as a learner, I can just log in on my cell phone. I could take a 15-minute break. I could do it after hours. I could run it on my laptop at my workstation. I could run these scenarios to kind of get the repetition I need to be effective. Or you could tie it into a learning management system or alternate applications where I'm getting my knowledge-based training, and then boom, now go work on how to perform this activity through these exercises.
That was my next question. Is it an LMS or does it work in conjunction with an LMS, right? Because like our course sits on an LMS, right? And I was like, how would this look like, you know, even just for example, like, so if I go into SimTrain, is it like my curriculum's there and it has like different modules within it? Is it like typically like a timeline where people go through it? Course by, like, how does it normally structured, or can you give us an example?
So both of those things are correct, right? You have modules, we have individual sims you can run, labeled by content, by functional role, by the different situations or scenarios. And then what a lot of our clients do is they'll take those and embed them into their LMS tool, either by deep linking, and then when they run the sim, they put that data back into an LMS and says, hey, Dan completed all of this content and he got all the acceptable scores. And you can actually set SimTrain up that you can't do the next level of modules till you got acceptable scores on the prior activities that you were supposed to do. So it progresses me through the learning process. Right. And so it's really neat to integrate with any sort of core technologies. If it's an HRIS system, if it's learning management, if you happen to have any call recording or QA monitoring tools, SimTrain will embed into those technologies to give you the ability to run the exercises. It's really great, to know, okay, Dan McCann has these deficits. So Dan, go fix that. And I'm like, okay, well, how? What do I do? Like, go run through these sims and run through these exercises, and you'll work on those behaviors and those skill sets that you're lacking. And that's the big integration play with, what you're using today.
That's the biggest gap, I think, in coaching and training, honestly, is the knowledge to application, right? Because it's the one thing a coach and a trainer can't facilitate unless they're literally sitting next to that person throughout the week, right? And no, like to your point earlier, trainers, even in big companies, like, I mean, we had a trainer when I was at the larger company. I think there was 85 people in our office. The hiring classes were 25 people. It was one person. I mean, even with a dedicated full-time trainer, and that's not a big office, by the way. Like, that's a pretty small satellite office. And they were absolutely stretched thin. They can't sit there and shadow and role play calls every hour of every day. Like, there really hasn't been somewhere where you can send somebody. Like when you said deficit, I'm like, that is just a perfect example of, hey, this is what we need to work on. Here's the Sims, run these. Let's see how this helps. Trey, what were
Let me give you an example. Yeah, I was going to say, let me give you an actual example of that. So, at Lean, we have a carrier sales department that brings on a lot of people each month to take on carrier sales roles. And carrier sales is pretty straightforward in terms of what you're asking somebody to do, whether it be, it's obviously to sell a load to a truck, or to work on building your capacity network. And so we had one guy who was really leading all the training, and he was trying to do one-on-one role playing with all of the employees. And it was very difficult. I mean, the guy was just there's just no time. He's just going crazy. We got the sim set up for him so that he could then put all of his team through those, where they're doing the simulations, the role playing with SimTrain and no longer with him. And now the 50 people in his class are able to get really good training and really good feedback. And then, he can then take a look at their scores and where their deficiencies are and focus just on the deficiencies to bring them up. And so his time is much more targeted, it's much more focused, much more efficient, and he's much happier because he's not trying to fit in 50 one-on-one calls with new people every month. And so it just creates a ton of efficiency. It creates a streamlined training process, and just allows one person to do way more than they could ever do on their own. Because the training, as you can imagine, just wasn't as good before. You just can't get it all in.
It's funny, and it's like, that is my bottleneck, right? Like, that's what Nate and I run into as coaches. Like, it's that, like, I have clients and I try to, as much as I can, jump on, dialing sessions with them, do it with them so that they can get an example of it. But again, like, I'm always constrained by the hours in the day. There's only so much you can do. And at a certain point, I end up with more clients and I have hours in the day, and you just can't do as much as you would like.
I see that a lot with, so like, let's say you've got a broker or an agent that they're kind of stretched thin, right? And they're like, it's time for me to hire somebody. And then what they don't always think about is, well, if I'm going to hire somebody, to make them effective, I have to spend a lot of time training them and getting them up to speed, which takes away from me being able to be productive with my book of business. And oftentimes I've seen people that they've gone through like 3 people and the people don't work out. And they're like, man, I just got 3 bad eggs. And I'm like, or did you not properly train them and they didn't work out? You were more concerned about hitting your number than getting someone up to speed.
Yeah, there's a common denominator in that equation for that person.
And you know what else is funny, right? Like, the analogy I always kind of use when people are at that point in our industry is that, like, they're underwater, right? They can't keep up with the workload they have, right? But they don't realize when they bring on the person to help them get their head above water, at first that person's going to sit on their shoulders and push them below water. And they're like, deeper, you've got to tread twice as hard for the next 2 to 3 weeks for this person to have any chance or shot. And guess what that 100%. Means? That means if you're running 100 loads or 50 loads a week, you're going to be doing 20% less, 25% less, maybe 40% less. And realize that's a real cost, and people try to avoid it. And to Nate's point, where does that show up? It shows up because they're not willing to give up to pay the bill, right? To pay that cost and time. And where that comes up is, like you pointed out, the common denominator. Everybody they try to train but don't give the time to ends up never having the tools to succeed and didn't have a shot in the first place.
And that's where something like SimTrain changes the balance of that equation, changes out that time requirement where they can still they still need to spend time with that person, but maybe they can give that person tasks to do on SimTrain while they move those loads and try to stay above water a little bit better. Having a partner in that whole equation, whether it's training one person or training 100 people, SimTrain can be really valuable now. We've just seen that across the board at Lean.
And also, they only have to do it once, right? Like, they've got to build it out one time and can use it for all 3 of those people. They're not literally trading hour for hour.
Yeah. Exactly. Making adjustments is a lot easier down the road, and making tweaks if you find something better. But yeah, once you have it what you want, then it's just, rinse and repeat.
I'm really excited about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Any further or final thoughts on the labor market, training in general? I know you can go down a deep rabbit hole here, but it's been a good discussion.
I'll jump in just to say a couple of things real quick. It's interesting what's happening in the market right now. We're seeing that employers are pulling back from offers that they've made to employees, slowing down hiring just a little bit. But what's interesting about that is that the workload isn't changing. The economy is still doing pretty well. People are still buying products and things like that. So I think what employers are deciding is, the labor costs have gotten too expensive. So we're going to have to roll with our current team, or we're going to have to find another solution. For us, that's been a good play at Lean because, people are finding great quality talent, whether it be with our team in Colombia, Guatemala, or in the Philippines. They're finding good talent to kind of fill some of those roles. And it's a self-correction. We talked about this in the green room before. It's a self-correction because, as inflation goes and as salaries go up, at some point there's a breaking point where it's just not really sustainable. You're not getting quality talent. People are only lasting 4, 5, 6 months, and they're not really panning out. And I think employers are saying, we're going to hold back just a little bit on hiring, but not because the economy is slowing down, but because the costs have gotten a little too expensive.
Yeah, and I think that's the big advantage, right? That's always been with the offshore, nearshoring, right? Like there's just such a,
right.
discrepancy
Great
between
employees.
the cost of employees here as it is there. And it's not a difference in quality. It's just a difference in economic situations of the countries.
That's right.
So
great team members, great attitudes, but lower costs for sure.
Let me ask this question in regards to the staffing pillar of Lean. So, what is a proper expectation that someone should set for themselves of, hey, I've got a new person starting, let's say, next month. How long should somebody expect before that person is fully integrated on average into their company and their company's processes before they're an effective team member and their training or onboarding period is fully completed? Are we talking months, weeks? What is that on average?
Yeah, it completely depends on the role because some roles require more training than others. If you're looking for a BDR, for example, I tell people 3 to 6 months before you start to see a real good return because that's a harder role. If it's a track and trace position, that's a little bit easier role. So it might be, 2 to 4 weeks before you're really starting to see them just like doing really, really well and getting up to speed with what it is. So, but it shouldn't be any different than what's normal. So if they hire somebody in the States for track and trace, how long does it take them to become, up and running and productive on the team? That shouldn't be any different just because they're in Colombia or Guatemala. So I would look at, what you're typically used to. Obviously working with Lean, you have a partner who does some of the training that helps you out tremendously. So there is an accelerant in that regard, but it shouldn't be any longer than what you're used to expecting. If it takes somebody a month to get used to track and trace, expect a month, maybe 2 weeks, and be pleasantly surprised when it's faster.
Yeah, I was going to say, you make a good point between your sales reps and your ops people. So I was thinking more operations, and because that's what the first hire for a lot of these successful brokers is they want someone to do like track and trace and data entry, things like that are taking away from them increasing their sales, right? And I usually tell somebody, you're going to spend a month, right? You're going to spend a month of them, they're shadowing you. You're having to show them what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if this, there's different scenarios that they're going to have to run into, which it sounds like SimTrain kind of can expedite that process for you.
Absolutely,
give you more time. But
yeah.
Eventually, I always say about a month for an ops person. But sales, I think I usually say if it hasn't been, like you said, 3 to 6 months, I usually would say like 4 to 6. If you haven't given it that long, you don't know if they're effective or not yet. Because there's people that they're like week 3, they're not doing anything, and I'm like, it's sales. Like a lot of this, your sales cycle is very, very long, in a lot of the things in transportation, right? Because you don't just pick up the phone and try to close somebody on the first call, right? You've got to build rapport, build relationships.
Exactly.
They have to figure out the best way to present their offering and service and find their voice on the phone, and just start fishing.
If you take proper training, proper development, pipeline development, learning from mistakes on the phone, 3 months minimum for somebody in sales to even see like how they're going to perform and what their deficiencies are and where to improve. A typical ramp up period for almost any company, any product is somewhere between on average 3 to 6 months. If it's a longer sales cycle, it might be 6 months to a year before you really know if this person has it. If it's a shorter sales cycle or a lower cost product, it might be 2 to 4 months, but I think 3 to 6 is that sweet spot. There's just things you can't sidestep in sales.
Agree. I would say the only caveat I would say is I look at it less from time frame and I look at more of reps, right? Like the one upside of our industry, it could take you 6 months if you're making 30 calls a day. You're making 80 calls a day, It's going to take you significantly
Speed
less,
up.
right?
That's
Like,
correct.
and to your point, I mean, if you're in some of, like we were talking earlier, if you're in, SaaS services, some of the sales cycles are a year, right? You're not going to get as many reps as you can in this industry and that one necessarily if you've got larger deals, longer sales cycles. But it's always a function of practice, right? How many times have you swung the bat? How many times have you swung the golf club? How many threes have you sat there and shot in your backyard, right? Like, how much work have you put in?
Right. And I think a better indicator than just calls is like actual conversations. Like how many conversations are you actually having? Because you can make 80 calls, but if you only talk to two people, that's nothing. If you make 30 and you talk to 6, right, then you actually get more out of that. So I look at, how many conversations have you had?
Yep.
And then you look at some of the metrics like, okay, are you scheduling whatever the next step is? Like, are you able to get that done? If you can, then that's pretty helpful.
Yeah, activity begets results, but it's not just the volume of activity; it's that learning opportunity along the way that takes place, right? And you're getting better, you're performing better, and you're tracking all these metrics that are activity based, but it's outcomes are what you're ultimately measuring. And then if people are hitting their numbers, you no longer have to sit down with all the activity metrics and go through them. Right. And that's, one of the things that's really good about SimTrain is you're actually having those conversations that Trey's talking about.
I wanted to ask you that.
Instead of just on the dials.
Can you tell us just a little bit more before we segue on, like, what is the feedback for the user like? Like, what's the experience? So if I'm doing a simulation, like, how does that, like, play out? Can you give us, like, maybe even a little example of, like, how that looks like from the user's point of view?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples. I'll log into SimTrain. I'll pick a track and trace, and in SimTrain, I'll go into my TMS solution. I'll identify the load, based on, whatever the criteria is that I'm using to identify the load. I'll actually make the phone call to the carrier and have that conversation with the carrier, which is all simulated, right? It's a simulated conversation.
How does that work?
Update.
How does that work? Like the simulated conversation, am I speaking with like a robot? Am I speaking with like a recording? Like how does that?
Yeah, what's cool is you can speak to a human voice, right? It's a robotic response that has a human voice overlay. You can do the text-to-speech voices. They're okay. They're pretty good. But it's way better when you're talking to a human. So it's a robotic response, right? It's a simulated response, but you can overlay the human voice on that, so you're actually talking to a human inside of SimTrain and responding and updating the software. Go, Trey.
And when you're building the Sims, you can record your own voice. So like if I'm the sales manager, I can build these Sims and then I can actually be the response. So it's not just a digital voice. It can actually be my voice giving responses.
Yeah. So for example, like you could, let's say you wanted one of your Sims to be, someone's going to book a truck and the person on the other line, the dispatcher or the carrier is kind of red flags for double brokering potential, right? You could record simulations where, they're getting real shady about their responses to your questions about what's the MC on the side of the truck, or what's the truck and trailer number, and so you can pre-build all those yourself, customized to whatever content you want your folks to be exposed to and trained on.
And different iterations of it. You can have it softer and then have them be shadier as you do similar scenarios that are like, and be able to work through those different strategies and questions and how to do the right discovery to make sure. Yeah, Dan, even though they messed with us, that was your fault because you didn't ask the right sorts of questions. You didn't navigate that dialogue the right way. Absolutely, Nate.
Yeah, and the other application, like the sales side of it too, even you could probably throw like the top 20 or 30 objections in there, right? Of that brokers get all day long when they're calling on customers, and give them reps on that. That's pretty good.
I'm excited to get in here and get my hands dirty and to start going through some of this.
Cool. We'll get it. We'll get you set up, Ben.
Well, good stuff. Well, hey, we're gonna transition into our Q&A before we wrap it up here. So we've got 3. Usually, I would give a shout out to Lean, but I think Trey, you gave a pretty good spiel today. And
well, you can always give a shout out to Lean. I'm never gonna throw shade at that.
Well, it's been obviously the biggest thing here has been like the labor shortage recently, and folks want to know how to hire. And I've referred a lot of people over to Lean over the years, and Ben and I use them ourselves. We use Lean for we've got the marketing side, the tech side, and obviously staffing's huge. So
we just had an event up in Chicago. We took several employees, or not employees, excuse me, customers to the Cubs Cardinals game at Wrigley, and the overwhelming sentiment, of course, from small brokerages to larger companies is we couldn't be where we are today without working with Lean. So it's a testament to the employees and to the structure that Lean has. It just makes it so much easier to. What we try to say is we take the headaches out of hiring and growing your team. That's really what they do.
Yeah.
It just makes it really, really simple.
Awesome. All right. First question today, these are all from our listeners, and these all came through the contact form on our website. So we appreciate everyone sending your questions in. First one was, how can I find a broker to be an agent for if I have no experience? And so I personally get this, I run into this a lot, especially working in the agent-based world with Pierce Worldwide, is you get, a lot of the bigger agent-based companies, they're going to want someone that's already experienced as a broker. They already have a customer book of business of all their shippers and whatnot. And they're like, well, if I don't have a book of business, how do I go get hired or how do I go be an agent for somebody? And my answer to this is you're not going to be able to go to a big agent-based company without experience, without customers, and expect to just become an agent for them because they don't have training involved there. They want folks that are experienced. So that doesn't mean that you can't go network with a smaller broker or someone that and become their first agent. Or there's some brokerages out there that they might do like hey, we'll hire you and we'll put you on straight commission and put you through training, and then if you make it, you'll be an agent for us. But what I really like is if you find a successful broker or brokerage that doesn't have any agents and you want to go be their first one, there's nothing wrong with presenting that to them. Ben, do you have anything you want to add there? I think they've got to get experience somehow, and they got to find someone that's going to take a risk with them.
And I would say that we definitely, even just in our connections, I can name a handful of brokerages that are W-2 that are looking to launch their agent program. And I know they're actively looking for ways to connect with people that are similar to this. And I know for a fact that a lot of them also have taken flyers on their first agent. Like you'd said, hey, you know what? This guy seems hungry. Seems like he's going to put the effort in. I'm willing to take a flyer on this guy. He sold me. And that's your first sale, right? The first sale you're going to make is going to be to the company owner on bringing you on an agent. Tell them why. Have that plotted out. I think the other way is, and you've talked about this quite a bit, is start calling. Start trying to get customers. Go through Google and just start calling and start trying to build rapport with prospects. If you've got some prospects that are willing to work with you, you now have a much better hand to play when you call that brokerage and say, look, I don't have my license. I'm not working under anybody's license, but I've been calling for the past 3 months and I've got 3 companies that really said they'd be willing to work with me. If I bring this business, would you give me a shot? Now you've got 2 viable options, I think, ways for people without experience to try to work their way into an agency market.
And then I think you have to set the expectation too, that you want to go to a company that is going to show you the ropes and educate you. You have to learn the freight brokerage industry, right? You can't just go set up as a 1099 sales rep or a sales agent for a brokerage and have no knowledge, right? So there's expectation management of you're going to put the hustle in and they're going to give you mentorship and training along the way to kind of bring those two together of your effort and then, their education and training and knowledge. So it's traditional networking, right? If a big company is going to tell you no because they're very, cookie cutter on what they're looking for, you got to go the traditional networking route and sell yourself to somebody. And I've had people that I've blatantly told, like, no, you're not a good fit for us. We don't have the training for you to get you up to speed. And they'll give me a million reasons why. Take a shot on me. And I'm like, I really appreciate your attempt here, but it's honestly, and I'll try to refer them like, hey, there's this company that I'm aware of that does have training for newer or for agents that are not experienced, and they'll put you basically through an interview process and see if you make the cut. But all right, so that's that question. Next one is, what is the best industry to prospect for new shippers? I don't know that there is one. People ask me a lot, like, who should I prospect? What kind of commodities should I go after? Ben, what's your input on this one?
2 answers. The first answer is, if you're new, go after lower risk commodities. They tend to have lower barriers to entry. You're more likely to get onboarded with a customer that ships commodities that aren't risk. So the lumbers of the world, the building materials, the bricks, sidewalk pavers,
stone,
the things that really are heavy that people don't pay high margin to move because they can move usually over a few days, not any specific day. You'll be way more likely to succeed with them. I think if you're in the industry, you've got some customers and you're looking for who to prospect now, I'm always looking for the ones that have the supply chain issues. And there are no shortage of news articles right now of companies that are having supply chain issues. No matter where you look, there's something every week where they're talking about a company that can't get product, they can't get it to customers. That's where I get my prospecting ideas. I don't watch the news to be caught up on every horrible thing that's going on in the world. I watch the news because I want to hear about the things that are going wrong in our industry. And anecdotally, those are the best things to talk about on prospecting calls anyway. That's your ammunition when you pick up the phone to call. Hey, I heard, there's a baby food shortage because your plant's been shut down for the past 3 months. Hey, are you guys needing any more capacity out of your existing plants? It's been a real issue. I know your customers love your product. That's a whole prospecting call right there, just from watching the news. That's what I personally go after, and that's how I find what I'm going to go prospect.
I would add into, look at what you've been successful in if you've been brokering for a while. So if you're really good in a certain niche, continue to prospect around that, right? So if you're good with oversized, overdimensional, heavy haul type stuff, and you're really savvy with permits and when are escort vehicles needed and stuff like that, stay in that realm. You can expand out to different geographical markets or maybe different commodities inside of that. But if you're really good at that one thing, stick to it.
You're better off going deep than going wide. Absolutely. If you've got something that works, go farther into it. You're better being an expert in one thing than a jack of all trades and a master of nothing. Doing a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Don't be afraid to ask for those
question.
referrals. Ask for the referrals.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely. Referrals are like, that's the gold right
And
there.
the number one reason why people don't get them is simple. They don't ask.
They don't ask.
And when they pull people, would you be willing to give referrals to the guys that you like working with? 100%. Have you? No. Why not? Because they've never asked. And people feel like they're imposing, and they don't realize that, like, if you're providing good service, they want to refer you to people that they know.
Definitely. All right, last question here before we wrap up is which sales script do you recommend? I want to answer this, and then I want to ask Dan his thoughts on this. So Ben, we've talked scripts so much, and I am not a fan of using a script. And I know there's like Jordan Belfort or whatever, the Wolf of Wall Street, right? I read his book, and he's all about sales scripts. I'm not. I think in brokerage, I think the personality and the way that you present just as yourself and as an individual is going to sell way more than the words that you're saying. But I'm also a fan of, if you're newer, having bullet points that you can reference of questions that you're going to want to ask, things that you're going to want to discuss and talk about, and maybe just, if a certain objection comes up, bullet points on what you can hit on or how you can respond. But the traditional, like, hi, I'm Nate, and I'm a freight broker with ABC Logistics, and we have trucks in your area. Do you have a need for truck? Like, I'm not a fan of those kind of scripts, and I think that listening in on people's calls and learning however the different people's how they talk and present to a prospect, I think that's beneficial, because then you can kind of learn, you pick things away like, oh, I like how he did this and how she said that. I don't like what they did, and you kind of make your own. And so, Dan, I'm curious, just in general with sales, what is your thought on scripts, and what's the methodology that you found successful or that you think works?
So, Nate, your example was perfect, right? When you said I don't like scripts, nobody likes the one that you just did, right? Nobody likes a robot reading something to them. That's just someone who didn't practice their scripts, right? The company where I developed SimTrain was in outbound sales prospecting. I trained over 10,000 software sales reps on how to prospect more effectively. And scripts are helpful because they guide them, right? You need a starting point and an end point and the types of things. If you read your script, you're dead, right? But if you use a script as a guide to get you there, it's kind of like what you said about bullets. Do I have 5 bullets that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I got to get through that flow so I can get to an end point? That's really helpful. And then what's really cool is I could practice each one of those 5 things, Nate, and I could practice the intro, I could practice the ask for meeting, I could practice the close, the follow-up, boom, 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 and I get through those, and all of a sudden, now I don't ever have to read my script ever. And I always challenge people. I'm like, I'll role play with you right now. And they're like, yeah? I'm like, yeah, give me 1 second. What are you doing? I'm getting my script ready. They're like, come on, you wrote these scripts. I'm like, yeah, I know, I wrote them, I put them together, but I need them just to kind of guide me through, because if I get lost, I got to get back on track, right? So I always use it. I didn't feel like it was a crutch to me. I just felt like it was more like a guide to help me get to my end result.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point, to have it as a guide, but not to read directly off of it,
right.
To be able to reference it. And I agree to that extent. Ben, I'm curious your thoughts, because you started at a big box.
I've done both. Well, and previous to me being there, my first sales experience was B2C, so consumer, and scripts. I'll never forget, like, I was so adamantly opposed when I started that, like, I felt offended. Like, you're going to tell me how to talk to people? Like, didn't you hire me so that I could talk to people? Like, isn't that what I bring to the table? Like, literally offended me. But luckily, like, my best friend happened to be the manager there, and he's like, Ben, he's like, try this for 2 months. If you don't make more money this way, then you lost 2 months. Would you trust me to try this? And shit you not, like, quadrupled the amount of money I made by using the script. But what I learned after, to Dan's point, is it's not reading it. It's once you know it so well that it becomes integral to your voice, your tones, your, rate of speech, your context, it becomes part of you. I find that, and I've written scripts for our industry, where I've run into issues in ours is that every shipper's SOP is just completely different than the next that you talk to. And the commodities they ship and the way they do business is just so independent to them that the consistent approach to every shipper I've not been as successful with. I think scripting openings and having a guideline, like Dan pointed out, this is where I want to start. This is what I want to happen here. This is where I need a hook. This is where I want to leave. Knowing that and practicing that, I think, is very helpful. I think that our industry needs a little bit more flexibility than some that I've worked in sales, like insurance. Absolutely. I've been in car sales, like I've coached in those industries. I've done financial advising. A lot of those work very well because you've got the same consistent needs you're trying to find on the other side. And ours, I think they're a little different from company to company. But again, I think the most accurate way to speak is to write out what you want to say first, to practice it so that at least you know where you want to go, because so many people jump into a sales call without any idea where they want to take it. They're like, oh, I'll just go wherever it goes. And the reality is like, you're the one directing the call. You should know where you're trying to get to at the end of it. You're the one leading it. And without writing that down for yourself, how do you even know where you're trying to take them to?
That's fair. Yeah, I agree. Well, good discussion on it. It's like people, we get asked all the time, like, can you give us a script? And I'm like, we don't have one. And I don't know that we'll ever, what we could probably create, Ben, is some kind of a hybrid between my bullet point system and your script methodology. So we'll
flow.
Stay tuned, listeners. We'll come up with something.
Nate's call flow.
All right. Well, good episode. Trey had to leave us early, so I'm going to pretend I'm Trey real quick. Trey, it was good having you. We'll see you soon. Sounds good, Nate. Go Chiefs. That's what he would say, is go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs.
But all right. So Dan McCann, SimTrain. How do folks reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, simtrain.com, SYMTRAIN. We're on LinkedIn as well. My email's dan.mccann@simtrain.com. And I look forward to, getting to know some folks and seeing where we can help out. Really excited about the opportunity. And after awesome. SimTrain, the next software I'm going to build is that little thing that Trey uses to pretend he's trying to get back in, even though he's doing something else. I think that's pretty neat.
Love it. All right, good stuff. Ben, any final thoughts here?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't.
That wraps up this episode of Freight 360.
You're right.
And until next time, go Bills. Referenced on this episode. And make sure that wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.